You know that haze you sometimes see over a city skyline? Or the smoke from a campfire? Have you ever really stopped to wonder what's in all that? Well, today we're going to shrink way down to the microscopic level and find out.
I mean, whether it's coming from traffic or a bonfire, it just looks like, well, smoke, right? But what is it actually made of? What are we all breathing in? Turns out the answer is a lot more complex and, frankly, a lot more important than you might think.
We've all seen this a million times. That thick, black puff of smoke from a diesel truck. It's probably the most in-your-face example of air pollution we see day to day. And that visible cloud? It's made almost entirely of something called particulate matter.
Okay, so let's start right there. That sounds kind of scientific, but what exactly is this particulate matter?
Simply put, particulates are just teeny tiny bits of solid or liquid stuff that are just hanging out in the air. You can think of soot and dust as the solids, and then things like mist or fog as the liquids. Basically, it's all the microscopic gunk that's light enough to just float around in the atmosphere.
But here's the thing you absolutely have to understand about these particulates. They are not all created equal. In fact, there is one single factor that changes everything about them.
It's not what they're made of, it's not even really where they come from. The number one most important thing, the thing that decides how they move around and how they affect our bodies, is something else entirely.
And that one thing is their size. Yep, it all comes down to how incredibly, ridiculously small they are. Because the smaller a particle is, the longer it can just hang around in the air, and the deeper it can get inside our lungs.
And here is the magic number you need to know. 2.5 micrometers. To give you some perspective, that's about 30 times smaller than the width of a single human hair. Anything smaller than this gets called a fine particle, and that's what health experts are really concerned about, because they're tiny enough to sneak right past our body's natural filters and get deep into our system.
If you're still trying to picture that size, think about this. You could fit a few million of these particles on the surface of a small coin. We are literally talking about an invisible world that is all around us, all the time.
So now that we kind of have a sense of the scale we're dealing with, let's zoom in. What exactly makes up this microscopic world floating all around us?
It's not just soot and dust. No way. The variety is staggering, from totally natural things like pollen to man-made stuff and even biological material. Let's just take a look.
Whoa. Okay, so this chart right here really shows that incredible variety. It maps out all these common particles by size. See, way over on the left, you've got relatively huge things, like rain. But as you move to the right, things get exponentially smaller, down to a scale that's almost impossible to even imagine.
Let's break this down a bit. The chart is basically split into two big groups. On the left, you've got coarse particles. These are things like pollen and coal dust. They're big enough that our bodies can usually filter them out pretty easily. But over on the right, you have the fine particles. We're talking tobacco smoke, bacteria, even viruses. These are the ones that are smaller than that 2.5 micrometer mark, and they're the ones that can slip right past our defenses. So, after all that, what is the most important thing to remember? Let's boil it down to the key takeaways.
All right, so here's the bottom line. The air around us is this complex soup of microscopic particles. And even though we might focus on the visible smoke we can see, the real danger often comes from what we can't see. The number one factor is size, and it's those tiny, fine particles that pose the biggest risk because they're small enough to travel the deepest into our bodies. Which leaves us with one final, kinda crazy thought. Right now, wherever you are, just take a deep breath. You just inhaled a huge, invisible ecosystem of particles, and it makes you wonder, what's really in the air you're breathing?